On November 11th, Chris Brown dropped off his 11th studio album entitled 1111. It was 22 tracks in total, 11 on the A side, 11 on the B side. And I must say, the album was a breath of fresh air from Chris. It was a mixture of genre blending, mainly toggling between R&B, Afrobeat, amapiano, pop, and a little dancehall here and there. The album was quite a spectacle. I enjoyed majority of the project. So let's just jump right into the review. So thematically, a lot of the project centers around love, romance, sex, and so forth. Usually these are the topics that Chris tackles, and it's pretty much the same here. However, the writing on a lot of these songs is actually a little more mature, and they're taken from different perspectives, which is something I really appreciate from him. Take for instance, on the track Angel Numbers, he dives into speaking about ascension, moving on, healing from past trauma, and so forth. And he's saying like, can you make a wish for me? So he personifies what 1111 means to him as the woman being the center, or the attraction that gravitates him to this higher level of consciousness. So that's something that I really think that he pulled off quite well on the opening track. Vocally, it's definitely one of the strongest cuts on here. Starts off with some somber guitar strings, then is followed by a 4-chord looped piano. So yeah, really great stuff from Chris. It then transitions into the track 10 Toes, which is a lot more upbeat. I've heard a lot of people make comparison to some of the production choices to that of Rod Wave, but he still delivers some really solid vocals here. And he speaks pretty much about his entire life, like a little bit about his come up, getting to where he is, and the luxury that he now can afford. But he also gets into a lot of deeper stuff, like speaking about his trauma, the anxiety that he's feeling, the pressure that comes with him being a star. He speaks about possibly the streets not loving him anymore, which I think is him referring to like the industry or even like mainstream media as the streets. So lyrically, these are things that I can appreciate from Chris, and it just really speaks to how that on the outside it looks like things are going really well for him, but underneath it there's a lot of trauma and pain built up there. So all in all, I love the juxtaposition of both tracks, where on the first half, which was Angel Numbers, he speaks to like a peace, a calm, or acceptance of bettering himself or getting into a better space mentally or even spiritually. But then on 10 Toes, it's just opposed by him speaking about the things that he has been through or was going through at that time. So all in all, this was an amazing opener, and I have no issues with that track. Definitely one of the highlights on this project. We then get into the groovy Afrobeat R&B blend of Sensational, which features Davido and Lojay. I really enjoyed that track, coupled with the music video. Definitely should have possibly been the lead single of this project. And there's not much more to say. Like, I've spoken about this track at length, so if you want to check out what I have to say about Sensational, all in all, you can find that on the channel somewhere, definitely. I get into Press Me, which is a sample of, I think, Akon and the name has slipped me, but it samples a track that Akon was featured on back in the 2000s, I want to say. Really, really, really groovy. It's a blend of, it's kind of hard to say what the track is. Yes, it's R&B, but there's a lot of vocal stacking taking place, especially on the hook. The verses are like a bit more bouncy. It gives a little bit of a Caribbean flavor, but it's not really Caribbean inspired. So, but it fits on the album in terms of sequencing, and you'll hear a little bit more about that as we go further into this review. We then get into the track That's On You, which features Future. Yeah, it's a trap and beat track, which they both, call out their partners or former partners on the way that they have treated them possibly, and the way that they have changed, with lines like, never thought that you let a lame nigga change the way that you move. and they just speak about things like their intuition, that they knew something was possibly up, but they didn't necessarily have proof at that time. But as time progressed, you realize that she was possibly for the streets and so forth. So, you know, a little bit of toxicity here and there, dabbling back and forth from Chris and Future. But all in all, the track worked, and I think the hook, when they harmonize, is actually really strong. We then get into Feel Something, which is this hypnotic guitar riffed R&B type of a track, very reminiscent of its past successful track Under the Influence, as you would hear me say directly from my reaction. But the track is actually really good. It's not massively composition lyrically, like it's a bit repetitive here and there. He lets the track breathe. There's a lot of empty spaces here and there, which is filled by the producers with, you know, a lot of reverb and echoes and so forth. So I really like that, and I love the fact that the instrumentation shines towards the end of the track. Feel Something feels like intoxicated sex. That's what it feels like. That's what it sounds like, at least. So yeah, it's a really enjoyable track, and he delivers some solid vocals here, going back and forth between his falsetto and his mixed voice. So all in all, great stuff. We then get into possibly what would be regarded as the slowest track on this project, and it's Best Ever, featuring Maeta. And I must say, like, Chris and Maeta actually delivers a lot based on chemistry, their vocal inflections, their harmonies towards the end, and just overall the track works. It speaks on just being the best partner that a person has ever had. It's a bit of an egotistical track when you check it out and go deeper into the meaning of the track, but it works. They deliver some really good vocals here and there, and it was a nice introduction to me personally for Maeta, as I wasn't super familiar with her getting into this project. This again is easily one of the best vocal performances on this project by Chris, which he really shines up there in his upper register. So I was tremendously impressed by him on Best Ever. I won't speak on every track at length. I'm really speaking on the portion of the album that I thought gave me what 1111 was. No One Else, which is this upbeat blend of pop, dance, EDM, and a bit of gospely R&B delivered by Fridayy on the hook. It speaks on not wanting to see your ex move on to someone new because you're still hung up on them, which is a sentiment I think a lot of us can relate to. So it was a good track, lyrically well written, and it was beautifully produced actually, especially when those tapped harmonies and background vocals from Fridayy kicks in on the hook. Amazing stuff. Easily Fridayy is one of my favorite features on this project. I think he really delivers, and he complements Chris's higher larynx of a voice a lot, so it works really well. We then get into personally my favorite track on the project. It's entitled Shooter. It's a solo track, and it samples a South African, I want to say it's South African, right? It features South African singer, hopefully I'm pronouncing this correctly, bear with me. It's Naledi Afiwe, yeah. And I must say, I've done a little research as to what her song that he sampled was about, and you realize that it's kind of a dark song. But I do appreciate Chris taking something that was pretty dark and turn it into something that can help to propel her as a music artist going forward, as she is credited as both a sample and a writer on this. So yeah, I can commend him for that. But getting into the lyrical sentiment of the track, he speaks to, I like this. Let me just say, so far the sequencing of the tracks that we've heard have all correlated and has made sense. You know, I already explained angel numbers, going into 10 toes. Sensational was self-explanatory. Press Me was him speaking to this girl about impressing him. That's On You was towards his ex. We then get into Feel Something, which was a sensual track, but it correlates off of That's On You with some of the lyrics that were towards the end. Then we get into Best Ever, which was pretty kind of the sentiment he was sending back to the same girl from That's On You. No One Else, also geared towards this ex of his, obviously. So Shooter is really the alternative version to No One Else, but it's taken from a whole lot more of a sentimental point of view, without the ego of just not wanting that person to move on. So I really like Shooter. It's an amazing blend. He literally starts off the track with lyrics like sick in love, highs and lows. And when you get to that hook about one thing about your love, I always fall for it. When you fire, you see smoke. I think it's some of the best writing on this entire project. And vocally, he was just immaculate on that hook. It's produced by, I want to say, Keith Ingram, Dro, and Rockstar. Rockstar does have a lot of producer credits on my favorite tracks on this project. So I think Chris should keep Rockstar around. He's really shown his quality on this project. So we then get into Nightmare, that speaks about, it's kind of like a storytelling track. Somewhat, it speaks on a guy that has had been in a really dark place. Like, he's been paranoid, and it kind of has led him down a path of possibly violence. And I do like the irony of saying nightmares no more, thus you dream, on the hook. I do think the track is a bit overly produced, especially with the auto-tuned vocals from Chris. I don't think he needed any of that. We then get into Very Special. And I must say, Very Special is reminiscent of a type of track that I think could have easily been on Beyonce's Renaissance album. That's how, I guess, good, or that's how different it sounds from everything on it here. It's this blend of, I think Fridayy played a role in Very Special, especially when you pay attention to that hook. It's a lot of stacked harmonies in its lower register, so it works phenomenally. Then you hear a lot of beat switches taking place, and it's like this I'm a piano vibe, and it really works well. And it's just him trying to woo a girl, basically telling her how special she is to him. So yeah, as I said, a lot of love on this album. We then get into Messed Up, which again, I think Messed Up would have been the original closer to this album, as it was originally supposed to be 11 tracks. And what I will say about Messed Up is like Chris getting to the point of the album where he realizes that he's in a continuous loop of ups and downs, and there's no point in life where he's gonna be totally up, and that healing energy from the 11:11 opening track was just gonna stick around completely, which I think he started to realize this by the time he got to Shooter, again with those lyrics, sick in love, highs and lows. It's just like this wake-up call of realizing that no matter how much he wants things to be a certain way, that he'll still find those setbacks. He'll still have those moments where he has to revert. It's not always a uphill climb, but sometimes you will stumble and sometimes you will fall. So I just love the sentiment of Messed Up. Again, a well-written track. More of that like slightly upbeat R&B that we get from Chris. Production-wise, it wasn't anything crazy, but lyrically it was really good. And I like the vocal inflections. I loved him going high, low, and even using some bit of belting. Not too much, but a little bit on certain parts of the track. I definitely love when the beat came out on the second verse and he was talking his shit. So that closes off the first portion of the album, and I will say if the album ended here, I would have been tremendously satisfied, as I think the experimental section of the album kind of ended here, and then we just got into kind of fan service. It was good fan service for the most part, but I think the album could have ended here. Well, I wouldn't say that, because there are like 3 tracks on the second portion that I think are really amazing. Midnight Freak. It's a pretty groovy track. I like it. It's not my favorite track, but it's definitely not bad by any means. Definitely a good track. Definitely a good Chris Brown track. Moonlight. Moonlight. Let me just speak about Moonlight. It's produced by Chizzy Stevens. I'm not super familiar with the name. Production wise, the track reminds me of that 80s groovy R&B that we'll hear from like Bruno Mars and so forth. But Chris does really well on here. I like the bridge. The bridge was just phenomenal on this track. The breakdown session definitely worked. The writing also was superb. So really good stuff from Chris. We then get into the first track that I will say is somewhat filler, and that was Bouncing XG5. And I do not dislike this track at all. I just don't see necessarily its purpose towards the 1111 narrative, which I could have possibly found something of substance from Midnight Freak and Moonlight. Bouncing doesn't quite offer that same sentiment, so the sole correlation would be the fact that it's a two-parter track like the opening track. We then get into Make Up Your Mind, which is probably the most aggressive track on this project, where he's just on a rant about this female, his partner, not being straightforward in what she wants, and just him being over the BS of that. So yeah, I think he delivers well on this track because I could actually feel a bit of the rage, and I like the double time beat for the make up your mind. Yeah, I think it works on this track. I'm not always a super fan of that type of production, but I think it works. It serves its purpose. I will say that all of the lines on this track doesn't actually work out, but for the most part, all in all, solid track. We then get into Stutter, which samples Joe's track of a similar name. I will say this probably has the best bridge on the entire project. Lyrically on the hook when he stutters and the beat stutters with him. I just think it's such a simple nuance, but it actually works here. So really solid. Again, I will say if that project ended after Stutter, it would have been, I would easily give this album a 10 out of 10. But then we get into like 6 other tracks, which for the most part, none are bad, but none are impressive. They're just a collection of by the books Chris Brown tracks. So I'll just quickly name them out. We have Need a Friend, Summer Too Hot, Feelings Don't Lie, Red Flags, Closer, and Views. None are bad tracks, but none of them are exceptional tracks. That's just how I feel about this album after giving it dozens of listens. I've been listening to it for what? How long has it been? A week and a half since it come out. So yeah, I feel like those 6 tracks weren't necessarily needed for this project, and they actually dwindle the quality of the project a little bit. And it's not, again, I will reiterate, it's not because they're bad tracks, it's simply because they're not half as good as the previous tracks. And I know some of these tracks will be someone's favorite. We all have different tastes, but I just think narratively, lyrically, and sonically speaking, these tracks just kind of bleed into each other, and they don't necessarily add a lot of more depth to the project. So I will say track 16 would have been a really amazing point for a cutoff. So all in all, I give this project a 9 out of 10. I easily think it's one of his best projects, and I think it should have been the follow-up to his 2019 effort, Indigo. Album does carry through with the ascension and the spiritual side of things. It would have been a great follow-up. And then Breezy could have come after. Well, I think Breezy would have been a step back in a weird direction for Chris. So I do understand it not being the album after 1111. However, I did enjoy this project. Really, definitely a solid project, and easily one of my favorite albums of the year thus far. I want to listen to it a lot more. I mean, I like tracks Feelings Don't Lie. I enjoyed Red Flags and Closer. I think Views was definitely my least favorite track. Maybe in a few months those tracks will become my favorites, who knows. But for now, he gets a 9 out of 10. Solid album, and I'm really impressed by Chris, especially for the first section of this project. So kudos